Well, the CFP seems to dominate all these days, but is just making the playoff really and making a deep run, is that really still more important than an SEC title? My God, I really hope that that's not true, but let's talk about it and more right now on this live edition of Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on this live edition, I want to talk about the NCAA making some changes in the transfer portal, but really everything is still the same, in my opinion. The biggest problem remains. Let's put it that way. Once again, Arkansas, by the way, taking one of Missouri's leftovers. Yes, Al Davis didn't last too long at Rockbridge High School, did he? So that strange saga appears to be sort of over. We'll talk more about that as the show goes along here. Also going to get to your questions as the show goes along, and a bit of a truncated slate in the SEC this week, including Missouri being on a bye week, of course, but plenty to get to, plenty to discuss. Yes, I'm going to take a relaxed attitude toward work today and talk about the football match. That's right. The Mo Tigers are my favorite squadron. But you know what? Before I start the episode quickly, I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. And you know what? I had a bit of an off-air argument with my guy Chris Gordy from Locked On SEC, and I actually ended up sharing what I shared with all of you on the show, which is the S&P Plus odds for Missouri, Ole Miss, the rest of the conference to win the SEC title. Now, actually, Ole Miss a slight favorite at that time. Missouri second at about 12%. You had three or four other teams that were right there in the 10 to 12% range too. So it wasn't so much, hey, Missouri's going to win this thing, everybody. It was just more, wow, this thing is wide open right now. Stephen Willis chimed in the group chat saying, Ole Miss and Mizzou, let's go, baby. Well, Chris Gordy, being let's be honest, secret LSU fan, but seriously, Chris Gordy, more of an old school blue blood SEC type of guy. So when he saw that the Ole Miss and Missouri SEC championship game, when Gordy saw that was even presented as a possibility by my colleague Stephen Willis over at Locked On Ole Miss, well, Gordy couldn't help but jump in and say, well, that'll be the worst rated SEC championship game in history. And I'll be honest with you, that triggered me a tiny bit. I get tired of any time, regardless of what sport it is, by the way. I'm a big NBA basketball guy over my entire life here. And anytime it's not, New York or Los Angeles or some major media market, God forbid it's Oklahoma City and Indiana in the NBA Finals, the easiest topic in the world to do on First Take is, my God, the ratings. Won't somebody think of the ratings? And I get it, guys. We would love to have LeBron and Steph, at least the league office would, for example, the biggest stars, the biggest teams, the biggest markets every single year. That's not what happens every single year, number one. And in fact, over the long term, actually having different teams is actually good for the league, in my opinion. By the way, I went back and looked at the ratings. In 2013, when Missouri played Auburn in the 2013 SEC title game, sure, I realize Auburn has more of a history than Ole Miss, but still a pretty good comparison. I went back and looked at those TV ratings, and I pointed out to Gordy, Gordy, these ratings were about the same as what Texas and Georgia was last season for the SEC title game, to which Gordy, of course, to his credit, he's always got an argument, doesn't he? He's like, well, the SEC title game, it's basically a glorified exhibition game now. So now, if you thought I was triggered before, Well, now I'm practically kicking holes in my drywall in my office at this point. Because if you're telling me that an SEC championship game is now a glorified exhibition game, listen, if you want to tell me that the SEC title doesn't have quite as much impact, maybe 5% as much as it did in the pre-college football playoff era, okay, I can maybe get down with that notion. But a glorified exhibition game, if that's really true, if that's even remotely true, if college football has gotten to the point, if the playoff has gotten to the point where it dominates this sport to such an extent that an SEC title is just basically going to be, like a division title in the NFL, when the Chiefs have won it 10 years in a row or something like that. There's no flags in Arrowhead Stadium that fly to acknowledge that accomplishment. Now, we're all about Super Bowls here with the Kansas City Chiefs these days, understandably so. But at Missouri, or any team in college football, my God, obviously Ole Miss too. Ole Miss and Missouri are two great examples because it's been since literally the 1960s since those teams have won an outright conference title. Of course, that's not just the SEC for Missouri. That's the Big 12. That's the Big 8. And I'm sorry, for me as a Missouri fan, if the Tigers won the SEC this year or any year forward in my life as a football fan here, that's going to be about as good as a national championship for me. That's just my opinion. And if the SEC championship has been diminished at all, then that is a huge, huge flaw of the college football playoff. And it's frankly a terrible flaw of college football. It could be the type of flaw that ends up really hurting this sport in the long term. And yes, short term, while ratings people will point out that, hey, look at the ratings for the college football playoff. Isn't it great? Fine. I'm not saying I'm not going to watch these games. God knows I'm a sicko. You've got me. I'm in. I'm not going anywhere as far as a college football fan goes. Throughout all these changes, I've been pretty consistent with that. Any of the changes that I've complained about and discussed, I've said, hey, you've got me. I'm a Missouri college football diehard. I'm not going anywhere. I do wonder, though, the more you put more and more emphasis on the CFP, you do eventually take away the traditions that makes this sport great. And number one, in my opinion, what makes this sport great is Saturdays on campus. And the more you start moving away from that, the more you play 3-4 games a year, the most important games of the year, evidently, are all now played off of campus in places like Arlington, Texas, and Pasadena, California, instead of Columbia, Missouri, and Oxford, Mississippi. I just think something is really lost there. And indeed, if there's a lot of other fans who feel this way, I feel like Chris Gordy was just needling me and being argumentative to some extent, to be honest with you. But if this is really true, then I think college football has made a massive, massive mistake. That's just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you all have to say about this thing, by the way. I don't know. I have one listener who says, by the way, it gets boring to watch the same old SEC teams in the title game every year. If the SEC game is a glorified exhibition, then why does he even care about the ratings? Ha, we are with you, John. So I'm glad I have some agreement there. Take that, Chris Gordy, you son of a gun. But anyways, I just really think that if the idea, hey, maybe for Alabama and Georgia, maybe for them it's more of an exhibition. But my goodness, if Eli Drinkwitz and company gets to an SEC title game this year, anything less than a 100%, we're going all out to win this thing because flags fly forever. I mean, if that ever happens, we've ruined college football. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I really don't. Because if we're just going to care about the playoff, guess what already has a playoff? A better playoff. The NFL. So, I don't know. We're expanding out to 16 teams, probably, in the future. For what? Do you think the 13th, 14th, and 15th teams in the college football playoff are ever going to win a national championship? It just doesn't seem very likely. Sure, those teams can win a round or two, but four? I don't know. I know that I've talked a lot about parity and all that stuff, but just to me, that seems like a little bit of a bridge too far. And speaking of parity, I'll disagree a little bit with my previous commenter. If it's Alabama and Georgia again for the SEC title, if it's Georgia and Texas, sure, I'd like to see more parity, more fresh faces in there, but I'm not going to force it either. I'll tell you that. I'm not going to be bored by another Georgia-Alabama game. That's where I'll disagree with you a little bit. And I don't want to see forced parity, and I don't think we've had that. That's the good news about the SEC this season. I think we've had a ton of parity this season, a lot of unpredictability, a lot of chaos. But at the same time, I don't feel like that's been the goal of the league office. It's just kind of happened naturally. And I think that's a great thing for the sport. Whereas in a lot of other sports, you see it in the NBA, the NFL, I think forced parity can actually be a bad thing. But you know what? Coming up on the show, let's talk more about Ole Miss and how the complete and utter chaos around this league. Let's look more around the league this week. Plus, let's talk about that transfer portal change that, in my opinion, hasn't changed the most important factor of all. So let's get to that here in just a little bit. First, though, I want to tell you about Mazda, because this week, yes, this episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it is about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, they move culture, and they keep moving the game forward. And to me, Kirby Moore's fourth down play calling, especially in that Kansas game, boy, that really moved the Tigers going forward to a great victory against the Jayhawks. That fourth down and short where Brett Norfleet got wide open. Missouri Kirby Moore beautifully used a Kevin Coleman pickup on fourth down. That play against the Jayhawks, wide open, easy Brett Norfleet touchdown on that play. And that just moved the Tigers forward to a victory, of course. And when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there is more to every Mazda vehicle. It is Mazda. Move and be moved. And also, it is almost the weekend, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered the most. So let's break it down. And for Missouri, well, Josiah Trotter has delivered in a big way each and every week. This guy is just a one-man box-filling, run-stuffing machine. And if you've been watching week after week, well, you know this is not a fluke when Josiah Trotter is making every tackle in the run game. And just like Josiah delivered for the Tigers, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through 11/18. And yes, a big gulp of water is certainly needed after all of that ad copy and all of those hot Missouri takes being fired directly into your face and ear holes. But hey, speaking of hot changes, I guess, well, according to Ross Dellinger, hey, I remember Ross Dellinger. Didn't he used to work for the Columbia Daily Tribune, by the way? Same. Well, the NCAA Football Oversight Committee voted, again, this according to Ross here, today to support a single transfer portal window in January. Sources tell Yahoo Sports. The administrative committee still needs to formally adopt the change, but here's the change. The 10-day window is expected to open on January 2nd. So instead of there being an early portal window in December and then a later one in January, well, they're just doing one portal window, which to me is a positive change. The problem here is opening it on January 2nd still very much leaves the Bo Prabula situation open. In other words, hey, if I'm Bo Prabula, if I'm a backup quarterback in particular, or just anybody on any roster, but backup quarterbacks in particular, they need to move quickly. They can't just sit around on the market. Those starting jobs are few and far between. They're precious commodities, and they're not just going to stay open forever. Of course, Missouri wasn't going to wait until the end of January for Bo Prabula to make up his decision. So unfortunately for Penn State, well, they lost their backup quarterback in the run to the college football playoff. Now, fortunately for them, Drew Aller stayed healthy through that run, but Penn State would use Prabula on some, designed runs and all that type of stuff. So a real loss there was felt by the Nittany Lions, really to no fault of their own, and certainly no fault of Bo Prabula's either, in my opinion. My opinion, by the way, James Franklin's opinion either. So I have to say I wouldn't say I'm surprised because, the NCAA, not exactly the greatest leader of the sport here at the moment. So I can't say I'm surprised that they screwed up. I'm just disappointed that we didn't push this back until the end of the playoff. To me, that'd be about the simplest change you could possibly make. That would be a positive. Again, you're hurting your own playoff, the quality of it ever so slightly at least. I think the Prabula example is pretty clear there by doing this. And, you're putting guys in weird positions. Like I'm sure Prabula would have rather stayed for the end of that playoff run and then moved on to Missouri. Wouldn't that have been a better reality for him? But of course that wasn't reality, and he had to do what he had to do. I don't see how anybody could hate him for it, that's for sure, and Penn State certainly seemed cool with it. But as far as things that really maybe weren't cool, apparently Al Davis, from all reports and accounts that I've seen, may have had some shaky dealings behind the scenes that I'm not going to go into detail about the rumors. I don't have all the details pinned down with multiple sources or anything, but I've seen reporting out there and that Al Davis, this shouldn't be a surprise. He was fired sort of in the middle of the season for Missouri, seemingly out of nowhere. He ends up at Rockbridge High School. That is not exactly the career path that a defensive line coach in the SEC is typically taking. So eyebrows were definitely very much raised there, and they should have been. Well, either way, end of the day, Al Davis has now ended up with the Arkansas Razorbacks. Bobby Petrino, now the interim coach after Sam Pittman was fired following that just defensive disaster and really just give up, quite honestly, against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at home. Well, Petrino has shuffled around that defensive staff as if maybe he might be hanging around longer than the interim tag. We'll have to see there. The point here is Al Davis, the former Missouri defensive line coach, part of said shuffling. And, to most accounts, I think Davis was a really good coach at Missouri. So if Davis can, maybe not be shady, let's say, do the strange off-deal dealings that he had allegedly been involved in, if he can just stick to football, he should be fine, it would seem. I will say, by the way, Arkansas, I should say, has been taking a lot of leftover Missouri parts, including, Courtney Crutchfield, by the way, who was a big recruit last season for Missouri. Didn't do much for the Tigers last season. Has done literally nothing for the Razorbacks so far this season with no stats. By the way, Kejuan Lacey has been really good for Ole Miss as their running back. Notably, though, Williams Nwaneri hasn't really knocked anybody's socks off with the Nebraska Cornhuskers yet, with just 10 tackles and no sacks so far for Nwaneri. By the way, the 6'7", 265-pound Nwaneri is the type of prospect that is very unusual because at that height, I think what a lot of people saw in him is he has an unusual ability to bend at that size because typically that's almost too tall to be an edge rusher. Well, speaking of guys who might be too tall on the edge, at least at first glance, Missouri did get a commitment from the number one junior college player in the country, defensive lineman DeMarcus Johnson. He's listed at 6'8". I've actually seen some places 6'7", 6'8", 260 pounds. So actually very similar in terms of size to one Williams Nwaneri. A little bit more experience though at Hutchinson Community College. He's from Missouri City, Texas, by the way, with 3 years of eligibility to play. How much does the number one JUCO player in the country actually mean? Well, that's tough to say these days. Junior college, the ranks aren't quite as filled as they used to be. I'll say this, though. When you have an offer list that includes LSU, USC, and Mississippi State, now that's what I'm talking about. That's what I want to see in a recruit. By the way, speaking of the Hogs, well, a former commitment there on the high school ranks, a linebacker, J.J. Bush, recently announced his commitment to Missouri as well. 6'3", 215 from Theodore, Alabama, a four-star type of player, maybe one of the most highly ranked guys Missouri has had here in this latest high school cycle. And again, certainly a much different looking high school cycle this time around than Missouri had with the aforementioned Courtney Crutchfield and Keywan Lacey and Williams Winery. Just seems like Missouri much more willing to, obviously they're still going to take plenty of high school guys, but it seems like they're going to save the NIL money for guys with real experience, guys from the portal, and of course, just as importantly, I'd argue even more importantly, keeping around guys who are already on the Missouri roster. And, we got to talk some more SEC football, including just the utter chaos of this league right now. Also want to talk about Missouri apparently and reportedly backing out in basketball of the Players Era Festival. Let's talk about this, well, not totally novel idea. It happened last year in Las Vegas as well. I want to talk about the ups and the downs of this because I think there's definitely some upsides, but I think there's some real downsides to this as well. So let's talk about that here in just a little bit. But first, though, we got to talk about Peloton. Yes, it's all upside with Peloton, which is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. I think the swivel screen is really a game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. All right, we're back. Not a lot of comments this morning on the live stream, but that's okay. I didn't really give you all much of a heads up here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about this week in SEC football. And also, by the way, if I got one thing right this offseason, this was going to be a wild season in the SEC. Ole Miss, by the way, at least according to some numbers, is your favorite to win the league now. And Trinidad Chambliss is their starting quarterback. Enough said. Am I right? We didn't exactly spend a lot of time talking about Trinidad Chambliss on the squad during this offseason. So really, enough said there about where this SEC season is going. And really, I'm kind of feeling more chaos this week. I think Vanderbilt can absolutely win in Tuscaloosa. And that's not just based on last season. It's based on the fact that I think Vanderbilt's a little bit better even this season. Is Alabama better than they were last season? I think they're a little bit better at quarterback. I like Ty Simpson more than Jalen Milroe. But other than that, I don't know that this team is wildly different. It's going to be really interesting. Let's put it this way. If Alabama crushes Vanderbilt today, then I'm going to have to change my mind and reevaluate that Missouri game if that's truly a coin flip type of ball game, as I've been intimating here all week. Also, I'll be honest. Texas at Florida. I find that game to be incredibly intriguing as well. Part of me wanted to do a money line parlay over at FanDuel, throw Florida in with Vanderbilt and get crazy. Let's get 11-1, that type of deal. But as much as I think Florida's defense can definitely keep the Gators in this ball game, I just don't think they're going to score enough to win. DJ Lagway and that Florida offense, I just don't trust them enough right now. Obviously, hey, Oklahoma over Kent State, not much to talk about there. Georgia, Kentucky. Hey, Georgia, at some point, Georgia needs to look more dominant if I'm going to think they're truly a threat to win this league. Texas A&M and Mississippi State. I got to say, that's a surprisingly high spread to me, 16.5. And what does that mean? That means you should usually go with the opposite of what I'm thinking, so take the Aggies. But I have to say, that Texas A&M defense, even though the Aggies number 6 in the country right now, I think Mississippi State will be able to score on them. The A&M offense is absolutely for real, so they'll probably score too much down in Kyle Field for Mississippi State to win, but I could see that being closer than the experts think too. So a wild SEC week of football, even without Missouri, does threaten to beckon here. And by the way, a real wild and interesting idea that happened last season. I'll be honest, I didn't really tune into it last season, but I have to say the Players Era Festival is something that if you want more high octane matchups, high profile matchups, I should say, really, in college basketball, especially in November, in December during the non-con period, well, it's tough to argue with the Players Era Festival, which is, I don't know, for lack of a better term, is basically an NIL fest. A whole bunch of NIL money thrown around here to entice teams to come to this tournament. Basically, every team is going to get $1 million who's invited there to divide up between their players as they see fit. The winner of the tournament would get another $1 million as well. Basically, the whole thing takes place in Las Vegas, though, and there's my problem with it. I have to be honest. Nothing against Las Vegas per se, but once again, like I think one of the keys to keeping college football great, well, same thing with college basketball. It's big games on campus. That's what makes this sport special. It's not the neutral site stuff. We have plenty of neutral site stuff in the NCAA tournament, in the conference tournaments. If you want to make the conference tournaments even more devalued, well, how about a tournament in Vegas as well? Now, listen, I'm okay with the more traditional, hey, let's go to Hawaii. Let's go to that type of deal, the Maui Invitational. Great. I just think when you put, again, everything is now going to be an event that is to be mined for money purposes. You know, I understand we're never going to put the toothpaste back in the tube as far as now that all these games are on television, there's just a ton of money in it. That's never going to change. I just keep waiting for someone to be in charge of the sport and say, hey, do we want to keep college football and basketball unique and what makes it different than pro basketball and pro football, by the way? Or do we want to just get more and more like our pro counterparts here? That's one thing that has bothered me here for a long time. And again, if you're Chris Gordy and all you do is look at the ratings every week, then you're not going to care. I just think eventually those ratings could burn you. I really do. So, all right, let's just check the comments here, make sure I didn't miss anything. I want Mizzou to give Bama its second L. You and me both. Darren, 2025 is a great year for Mizzou, and we are ready for Alabama. Vandy, Bama, going to be fun to watch. Yeah, absolutely. That's my favorite game of the week. I cannot wait for Vanderbilt and Alabama. I hope Texas and Florida is good, just not as confident about that one. If anything, I don't know that Texas and Florida is going to be a good game, by the way. I'm just hoping it's a bizarre game. That's really what I'm hoping for here. I wish we offered a journeyman NIL, the player who is a workhorse and or who returns for his senior year, something along those lines. So I don't know, you're talking about the super senior like Caleb Grill, that type of deal. We've had a few of those players. And in fact, that is definitely something that Dennis Gates and Eli Drinkwitz love, is those super seniors who have like 28 years of college sports experience. But hey, thanks for joining me here on this live edition of Locked On Mizzou. By the way, appreciate all of you who joining me. As always, you everydayers, you comment makers on the live show in particular. I'll be honest, this is, if you want to ask me a question when I go live, when I do these live premieres here on YouTube, that's the best way to actually ask me a question that I'll really see. I get too many comments these days, and some of you are mean. You're very, very mean, and I'm very sensitive. So I can't look at them all. I got to be honest with you. So with all that being said, appreciate you joining me here on Locked On Mizzou on this morning. So let's watch some football the rest of the day and have some fun. I'll see you on Monday for the week of Alabama. Take it easy, folks.